Sense is a short art film about the five senses and how they link, overlap, and feed into one another. Different senses can alert us to danger, pleasure, or simply something that is happening near us. Our senses can be deceiving, and it isn't always obvious where one ends and one begins. The five senses appear in the following order within the film, overlapping as they merge into one another: sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. Production for the short film, after the concept was established and storyboards drawn up, began with shooting the footage. The film was shot using a Nikon D3300 DSLR camera in video mode. This camera, normally used for photography purposes, gives the footage a surreal and supernatural depth of field, hence why this camera was chosen rather than a regular camcorder. After consulting the storyboard and establishing what shots would appear in the film, props were purchased and organised, ready for filming. Filming occurred over 4 days due to the variation in location, type of shot, and sheer number of shots. A tripod was used to create a steady and professional look, whilst allowing unnatural shots to be achieved in order to add to the surreal and hyper feel of the concept. 25 frames per second was used to create a smooth feeling to the footage, without feeling too literal, while still being highly defined and flowing. Editing the footage to the plan of the storyboard was done on Adobe Premiere Pro CC 2014. Similar effects were applied to all shots to create continuity within the film. An aspect ratio of 2.35 to 1 was used to create a widescreen and cinematic look. This helps recreate the feeling of seeing the material through the protagonist's eyes, and enhances the feeling of senses being felt throughout the audience. Colour grading was important in creating the look of the film, as it gave a unique quality and character to the footage. Shadows and dark tones were dragged slightly into the tealy blue hue, mid-tones to warm oranges, and highlights to light, warm yellows. This specific choice of colour grading gave the film a cinematic and hyper-real feel. It also helps enhance the contrast of images purely within colour, as teal and orange are at nearly polar opposite ends of the colour spectrum. High contrast, saturation and sharpness was used to enhance the vivid feel of the footage and matches the crisp sounds and sound effects heard. Location recording for scenes such as the park, the road, views of outside and the sky were recording using the Tascam DR100 MK2 location microphone. The flexible setup within the microphone allowed me to record my location sounds in stereo, something that is vital to capturing a realistic and detailed sound. For the most part, the location recorder was positioned high in the air, as far away from the human body or moving parts as possible, so as to capture as clean a sound as possible. However, this was not ideal for all purposes. For shots such as the green grass at the beginning of the film, the microphone was placed next to the camera where it was filming, in order to achieve the most accurate perspective of sound possible. Placing the microphone here allowed for more low frequencies to be captured, as it was closer to the ground. This was further exaggerated and highlighted in post-production. Location recording proved problematic for many reasons. Firstly, outside a controlled studio environment, it is notoriously difficult to control external influences and sound around you. This means the general public, traffic, alarms, environmental sounds, and so on. Especially recording minute sounds such as leaves rustling and grass moving, very quiet sounds, these external influences can be very difficult to eliminate when recording on location. Ways around this problem at the recording stage were limited. However, small changes such as windshields, timed recording, and large quantities of takes helped to overcome these problems. Within post-production, EQ, noise gates, and expanders were heavily used to filter out any unwanted sounds or frequencies. Going through recordings with a fine-tooth comb to find the best takes is also vital, but takes time. However, it is better to start with a superior take than to try and work with a poor take. Placing the location sounds back into their original space was also important. I overcame this obstacle by use of convolution reverb, placing the enhanced and edited location sounds back into an outside environment of a similar size and style. However, recording the Foley and sound effects weren't easy either. Objects have a terrible tendency to not sound how they are supposed to sound. This might sound ridiculous, but more often than not, sounds need to be created bigger and more dramatically in order to sound authentic when being recorded. For example, for water movement sounds, I use thicker liquids such as yogurt or juice just to create the same sound as we expect to hear from water. The majority of the Foley and sound effects were captured using a close mic technique. This meant that the frequency range captured was as full as it could be with minimal noise, while still giving me the freedom to place the sound as I wished during the editing stage by use of convolution reverb, single band EQ, panning and levels to position the sounds accordingly within the mix. Editing the sound was done using Logic Pro 9. After location sounds and room tones were placed and worldized within the mix, I began sifting through the Foley and sound effects captured and roughly placed them in the appropriate SMPTE position. A good example of audio manipulation to convincingly represent the visuals on screen is at 1 minute, 40 seconds and 7 frames, where the sound of rain is heard and seen through the glass window pane. Surprisingly, none of what you hear is actually rain or indeed water. Just typically, there wasn't a single rainy day in Huddersfield during my audio capture. The process behind making this sound involved firstly thinking about what are the components that make up the sound of rain, and secondly, what sounds like rain but isn't rain. The components of sound I ended up going with were a street location sound, an indoor living room tone, champagne bubbling in a glass, nails tapping lightly on a hard surface, and thick yogurt being poured slowly into a plate lightly coated in fruit juice. The resulting sound, with no effects applied, sounded like this. However, this still wasn't convincing enough, so the sounds needed processing. The street location recording needed convolution reverb and EQ to remove the low wind sounds that were clouding the audio image. The indoor living room tone needed convolution reverb, EQ, and compression. The champagne bubbling in a glass needed heavy EQing to remove the low frequencies and expander to widen the difference between the louder and quieter sounds, and pitch shift to make the pops and drips seem bigger. Naturally, smaller objects produce higher sounds, so to increase the audible size of something normally starts with making it lower. Therefore, the sound of bubbles popping turned into raindrops falling. The nails tapping lightly on a hard surface needed convolution reverb and compression, and the thick yogurt needed convolution reverb to place the liquid in an outside world, minute EQing to take out the microphone low noise, and an expander to enhance the dynamic range of the recording. The end result, in context, sounded like this. The final version was then mastered and synced with the high-definition video file. Please find it on Vimeo by searching Sense by Laura Willoughby. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.